Hey, it's Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. You can find me on the No Way Jose YouTube channel, all the major audio podcatchers, and Odyssey as well. Credit to my boy Justin Campbell at JCamp1521 for the intro. Today, my guest is Sal the Agorist. This is a live stream, just so you guys know. If you're watching the 17th, it will be available publicly only the day of during the stream. Immediately after, I will put it on private, unlisted, whatever, and it will only be available for my patrons. If you want to give me money for that, it's also available immediately at Odyssey as well. So if you want to go on Odyssey and not give me money, hell yeah, do that. Patreon.com says No Way Jose 2020 is that. The lowest level is $2. That gets you access to the basic, just that. There's differing levels, the highest being 20, and my $20 ones get the perk of being a sponsor. They get read during the episode. So my sponsors are CD McRae of the Whiskey and Tea podcast, at SpaceCat2K. That's his Twitter handle. Go follow him. He's good stuff. We did an episode, me and him. We covered like agorism for secession type thing, and that was a good one. Because that was a $10 level perk. You get to curate an episode. Jacob Winograd of the Daniel 3 podcast. He covers a lot of biblical anarchy stuff. Liberty Down Under of the Australian Liberty Network, and he also has the Gumtree of Liberty podcast. I'm actually going to be going on his show next week. It's been a hassle scheduling that because they're over in Australia, so with all the fucking time stuff. So that should be good. I'm looking forward to that. I appreciate his support. And I got a new one, Brandon Smith. I don't know if he has anything to promote. I just got him. I sent him a message. If you watch this, Brandon, send me a DM or message me back on Patreon. Let me know if there's something you want me to promote for a sponsor. But I have him. I appreciate his support. I'll definitely put out more of his stuff when he gives me more information. Today, the topic. This is our third part of the live reading series of NLM, New Libertarian Manifesto. Do want to remind you guys that I do already have a completed series of an Agorist primer with Caleb Brown of the Faith, Liberty, and Praxis podcast. He's a paleo. I also want to let you guys know next week I'll be having Marcel Dumas or Marcel Gautreaux. He goes by both kind of. And then Crip Daddy on to discuss the CNN N-word Rogan January 6th article, which I am really looking forward to that. Crip Daddy's a comedian. Marcel is a genius, and he's also pretty based too. So basically, we're going big brain time on the N-word and also the historical narratives that surround it. So it should be very fun. I'm very much looking forward to that one. As much as I enjoyed the Dave Smith episode the other day, another little plug for that. That's actually currently behind a paywall. By the time this goes public, this episode, it will be available for public consumption. But yeah, I mean, I don't know why. Something about this topic I just find very, very interesting to be able to actually like go do a deep dive on, the historical narratives that surround it, whether you should or shouldn't, the given context, etc. And then also how much CNN jumped the shark with comparing it to January 6th. And then even then on top of that, it was January 6th even really being that bad. I just said that, so make sure to follow me on Odyssey. We don't know if this will get pulled. Tower Gang, we just had Waste Man, or Garbage Man. I forget he changes that. I don't remember which one he's at now. We had him on. He's just one of the buddies from Tower Gang. He's a good guy. That was a fun episode. We don't always, do the clout chasing. We don't always the big guests. Sometimes we just have our buddies, and those are great too. So make sure to go check that out. We don't have a guest for next week, so if you guys want to throw out suggestions, we're always open to that. Go check out TopLobsta at toplobsta.com. Use Jose at checkout for 10% off. All right, let's get into it. Enough of this stuff. Hey, what's up, dude?
What's up? How are you?
Oh, doing all right. I guess I know we're doing a live reading here, but I mean, we'd be remiss if we didn't kind of, I guess, quickly cover kind of your thoughts on the debate with Dave. I almost wish we had a two-parter where we kind of like settled some of the misconceptions around agorism and then went into it, because while he did seem more knowledgeable than most, it is also there was some stuff that it's like, well, I mean, this is a misconception that we get sometimes. So
yeah, I thought it would be. I agree. It probably would be good to have like a follow-up kind of thing, just to like clear up some of the, like you said, misconceptions, some of the loose ends. But I thought it was good overall. I mean, I didn't go into it expecting to convince him, nor did I think he was going to convince me. But there's more common ground than there is stuff that we disagree on. So
yeah. No, yeah, for sure. That was actually probably the biggest thing that irritated me is that I feel like it gave agorism this conception of being this like lefty thing. And I don't mean the way that Conkin meant it. I meant it in like a commie, which I get it. There's some aesthetics of agorism that give it to that. But if you look at its economics, it's actually very much Rothbardian or, like a Misesian or whatever.
Well, it's like Sam said, we're more Rothbardian than the Rothbardians. We're more Rothbardian than Rothbard was.
Yeah.
And I think that's true, because again, it's the consistent application of libertarian principles. That's really all we're talking about here. So if you're a consistent Rothbardian, you're going to wind up at agorism eventually, one way or another.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. Otherwise, we can get into it. I mean, it was definitely, go check it out for yourself if you're watching. It was definitely interesting. It was about an hour and a half long. It was
yeah.
A lot of people gave me shit in the comments for. By the way, it's behind a paywall and it's already at almost 900 views, even behind the paywall. So like, not that I have that many viewers, but between the live streams and the people who just still had the link after the fact who were able to watch it or whatever. So it definitely has done some numbers. I've gotten some Patreons out of it, so I definitely appreciate you and Dave helping out with that.
Of course.
I had a point I was getting at, but I completely forgot.
They were yelling at you in the comments.
Oh yeah, they're yelling at me in the comments for butting in too much. But it's like I don't know. I had my reasons, and I also even said beforehand that I was trying my best to not make this a debate or have that debate feel. I was trying to make it more of a conversation. It went into debate a little bit a few times, kind of feeling wise. But and so that was kind of my thing. I even said I was going to be kind of a third person. Like, I was kind of like bouncing back and forth between like a moderator / other third person in the conversation. So I wasn't trying to do a moderator type thing. 'Cause I think a lot of people had this idea that it was going to be, we're doing the debate. And it's like, no, that's not what we're doing here.
Well, I for one preferred the 2 versus 1 aspect of it. So I wasn't complaining.
Yeah, no, that is that definitely helped. I was trying to do my best to make it clear that we weren't there to gang up on Dave. Like you even saw in there, we have some we have some disagreements, which could just be summed up as simple as just like maybe we got different interpretations of it, or even then there might be some parts of what Conkin has said that maybe I don't necessarily 100% agree with, or vice versa. So
hey, I respect everyone's right to be wrong, including yours and Dave's.
Well, all right. I guess let's go ahead and get into it. By the way, we're doing chapter 3. I would like to try to keep to getting like at least knocking out a chapter each episode, but this one is pretty long. So that you guys watching, if you want to be clean, unless if it gets over an hour and a half, I'll probably stop mid chapter because I don't want to go too long in the tooth with it.
I think we can bang this one out.
I think we might be able to. That might be, but that'll definitely be all we knock out this one. This is a longer one. So, all right. Also, by the way, people in the live stream always feel free to give me money. I like that shit. I will bring it up. But all right, having detailed our past, and by the way, this is chapter 3, Counter Economics, Our Means.
Of the New Libertarian Manifesto, of course.
Yes, of the New Libertarian Manifesto by Samuel Edward Conkin III of his name. Having detailed our past and status present and glimpsed a credible view of a far better society achievable with present understanding and technology, no change in human nature needed, we come to the critical part of the manifesto. How do we get here or from here to there? The answer breaks naturally, or maybe unnaturally, into 2 parts. Without a state, a differentiation into micro, manipulation of an individual by himself in his environment, including the market, and the macro, manipulation of collectives, would be at best an interesting statistical exercise with some small reference to marketing agencies. Even so, a person with a highly sophisticated decency may wish to understand the social consequences of his or her acts, even if they harm no other. All right, I think he's kind of leading into kind of a little bit of praxis there and how that works. Like even if maybe you're not necessarily harming someone, I mean, this is something that even a lot of the Rothbardians will go into that, or especially Hoppians, where it's like, yeah, this may not break the nap, but it may not be the ideal thing to do. Some, especially questions of culture, stuff like that. There are preferable cultures to be had. That doesn't mean that they deserve to be aggressed upon, but they may not be the ideal culture to get to a libertarian society or maintain one.
Yes, but I agree, but the Hoppians are wrong about that, of course, because really it's time preference is a function of the money supply. So rather than trying to create these cultural wars in their head, what they should be doing is being focused on alternative currencies like Bitcoin Cash and stuff like that, as opposed to using fiat currency. Then they would just get rid of the moral dilemma altogether. But that's a story for another podcast episode, I guess.
Yeah, you're not necessarily wrong. I can see it both ways because it is like if you do straighten out the economics, it does change the time preference issue, which then makes people's habits
100%.
generally be different. But it is kind of a one or the other. I mean, it's a little bit of both. I can see both sides. I kind of seem to lean towards you, but
well, there is a lot of overlap now because Tho Bishop is like one of the best damn paleos we've had since Lou Rockwell came about. And if you've noticed, Tho is really pushing the whole crypto thing because he understands exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, he's been great lately. I mean,
on the money.
I obviously don't agree with all of his takes. It gets some of the things I think are goofy, but
all
in all,
definitely worth a follow.
Yeah, he's a genius guy though, and I always enjoy listening to him talk, even when I disagree with him. With a state tainting every act and befouling our minds with unearned guilt, it becomes extremely important to understand the social consequences of our acts. For example, if we fail to pay a tax and get away with it, who is hurt? Us? The state? Innocence? Libertarian analysis shows us that the state is responsible for any damage to innocence it alleges that the selfish tax evader has incurred, and the services the state provides us are illusory. Yes, all right, I like this, like where we're going now. Which I do think this is a main crux of kind of, and this is the point we kind of got into with Dave a little bit, and kind of like what is agorism? And I guess maybe it's kind of sometimes hard to define in certain ways because it's almost like a mindset. In some ways, and that's kind of what he's getting at here. The kind of the idea that he's getting into that even a lot of libertarians struggle with this mindset, like just normal libertarians, of that, like, well, something's illegal, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Like, it's just a matter of measuring the consequences of it and whether you're willing to accept those possible consequences. It's not a matter of whether it's immoral or moral because it's illegal and therefore you shouldn't do it. I know a lot of people, even libertarians, struggle with that concept. So.
Right, and I don't know if it's in the beginning of this book or in the primer, but he actually talks about getting into the mindset of like training your mind into like seeing things this way, and so that you understand like you automatically like just grasp the concept that a voluntary exchange that's in the black or gray markets is like is an agorist action. That's something that we should be striving for. Like he explains that should be something that we sort of like. We're trying to train our mind to like just intuit that, and I think that's sort of what he's sort of knocking down the same door right now.
Yeah, but even so, must there not be more than lonely resistance, cleverly concealed or dropping out? If a political party or revolutionary army is inappropriate and self-defeating for libertarian goals, what sort of collective action works? The answer is agorism. It is possible.
So can I just stop right there?
Yeah.
So it's like we speak about, and this is something again that came up with Dave. It's like the individual versus the collective, and they say how we're like leftists for this and that reason, when really, and Konkin's pointing out best here, it's like the only sort of collective that we believe in is the market, right? Is the entrepreneur working together with the consumer. That's the only collective we actually believe in. So it really is ironic for everybody else to be calling us leftists, and it is sort of like ironic in a way that we have that moniker attached to the philosophy.
Yeah, which, like I pointed out before, and I know you disagree, that's kind of my biggest criticism, because then it causes these issues. And that's not even necessarily saying there's something inherently wrong with agorism. It's more of a branding thing, is the kind of way I look at it. But
true, fair.
Yeah. It is possible, practical, and even profitable to entrepreneur large collections of humanity away from status society to the agora. This is, in the deepest sense, true revolutionary activity and will be covered in the next chapter. To understand this macro answer, however, we must first outline the micro answer. Everything starts with the individual. So the function of the pseudoscience of establishment economics, even more than making predictions from the ruling class, as did the imperial Roman augurs, is to mystify and confuse the ruling class as to where their wealth is going, or the ruled class, not the ruling class, as to where their wealth is going and how it is taken. An explanation of how people can keep their wealth and property safe from the state, then, is counter-establishment economics, or counter-economics for short. Actually, I kind of want to go on that a little bit. I don't know if you've run into this a lot, but a lot of people get confused with the concept of counter-economics, and they play linguistic games to kind of like, I don't know, trip us up when it's, and even just point out there he's getting at counter establishment economics. So it's not because a lot of people point out counter economics and like saying it's like anti-economic or something weird. I've heard weird linguistic arguments.
That's just sort of that's just like a naivety on their part.
Yeah.
Konkin, and I don't recall where, but he explains that like the term comes from like the term counterculture was big when he was writing this. So the idea was like this was sort of counter to the mainstream version of economics. And he also had the concept of counter psychology, by the way, which is a whole nother rabbit hole to dive into.
Which I guess that would kind of go into what we were talking about a little bit earlier with the previous paragraph about like essentially it's not necessarily whether something's illegal or not. It's about, getting the right mindset. I'm assuming I don't know much about his counter psychology.
Yeah, that's more like Thomas Saz and those guys. That's a whole nother issue. But I do want to say the one sentence here that's really key is he says it's possible, practical, and even profitable to entrepreneur large collections of humanity away from status society to the agora. This is, in the deepest sense, true revolutionary activity. That, and not to shamelessly plug myself here, but in chapter towards the end of the book, there's some really great examples of how this happened in like communist Romania and like in colonial India. In fact, it's really the only thing, if you think about it, that's ever actually successfully freed people from the state is exactly what he's talking about here. Entrepreneuring large collections of humanity away from the state. That's the only thing that's ever produced liberty, right? Whether it's been doing that with Bitcoin or like the examples I use in the book, there's like this from like Romania, there was this Western, there was a smuggler who would bring in movies from the West. And that was sort of like a light that shined into Ceausescu's dystopia that eventually like grew and grew and grew because people were able to see like Western society and Western culture and all the goods and services in all these 80s American movies. And that's what inspired them to revolution. So Konkin really hits the nail on the head in that one sentence. That's really the essence of like all agorism.
Yeah. Not to get off on a rabbit trail, but I did want to bring this up. This is kind of the counterpoint to what I brought up before. I actually think you bring up a good point. Junkie Jeff, he says, Konkin turned my friend from a socialist to an anarcho-syndicalist. That's a step in the right direction. So I would say that is the benefits of the lefty critique that I gave. But I guess, and not to sound like a cornball, because I know a lot of people make up fun of libertarians for the neither left nor right type thing. But I guess I would prefer he had called it either right libertarian or alluded to right or just left it out entirely, not classified it as left or right. Because I guess if he had classified right, we end up with some of the issues that the Hoppians run into sometimes where they get a little crazy on one side. Not necessarily saying that's a bad thing entirely, but I guess I kind of prefer that aesthetic in a little bit way. But that's definitely a good point. Coming from the left or wrapping it to some extent in leftist aesthetics, it does have this effect of pulling people from the left.
So Jeff is 100% right. Like to move from socialist to syndicalist is a huge, huge jump, which we should be commended and applauded.
Yeah.
To your point, real quick, the whole concept of like left and right libertarianism, as we know it, like today, right now, comes from Tom Woods, who is more conservative is more right than left, right? And he sort of spread this idea that right libertarianism is sort of the correct version of libertarianism. And then when that's sort of coupled with late Rothbard and Hobbes' work, that's where the whole sort of disdain for quote unquote left libertarianism comes from. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, these are just labels. These are just, in tomorrow, in 10 years, what left and right mean could be completely different. So
yes, yeah, I know that was kind of my point that I brought up. I don't know if I actually brought it up with Dave, but I brought it up before that maybe when Konkin brought it up, it was under a different time, had a different purpose. He was thinking differently because and this is why I hate the whole left right thing. You see constantly like neo-reactionary people. I know a lot of people just went after James Lindsay recently because he said something, and I mean maybe he did say something wrong. I didn't really care enough to look into it too much, but he said something about, you need to keep an eye on the right. But then you have people who have their built-in definitions of what left and right are, and then they jump on people who criticize it, but it's like they're using a different definition. So left and right is kind of fucking retarded because it's different to everyone. So
I mean, you can tell everybody that Sal Mayweather doesn't trust either the right or the left. regardless of how you're defining it.
I mean, I guess it depends on you define it, because sometimes I've seen people who define left as they basically will define left as, well, that's bad, and then right is, well, this is good things. And it's like, well, okay, if we're using this definition, sure, yeah.
I know,
Okay.
and that's the thing. It's like, in what context are you using the terms left and right? Because it can be true, it might be true, it might be false. It really depends on the definitions that we're using here.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought a binary doesn't really fit well, doesn't really work well.
I know, in politics.
And fluctuates over the years. But yeah, no, it's more of a branding thing. And you know what? That branding thing could swing back, 10 years from now when the right's being crazy and everyone's like, oh, the left's great, like.
Right,
So,
exactly.
Yeah. All right. The actual practice of human actions that evade, avoid, and defy the state is counter-economic activity. But in the same sloppy way that economics refers both to the science and what it studies, counter-economics will undoubtedly be used. Since this writing is counter-economic theory itself, what will be referred to as counter-economics is the practice. Mapping and describing all or even a significantly useful part of counter-economics will require at least a full volume itself. Just enough will be sketched here to provide understanding for the rest of the manifesto. I guess I want to take this moment to kind of point out, a lot of people will say stuff, and I think a lot of people misunderstand what agorism kind of is. Like, it's essentially advocating entrepreneurialism while trying your best to try to set yourself apart from the state and be even counter to it in a sense, like counter economics. But so to lay out, how do I do agorism? That's kind of like, that's like how asking someone, how do I live a good life? Like, what are your values? Like, what do you like? I don't fucking know. Like, which maybe that might not be what he's getting at here, but that there is a point to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of like in a sense, like it is to each person whatever risk you can take on. Like, whatever your risk tolerance is, it's gonna be different. It's going to differ for each individual depending on, do you have kids? How old are you? What are your financial obligations? Like, everyone's risk tolerance is like a 17-year-old who is out all night. He has a really high risk tolerance. Someone who's 35 years old, they have a few kids, they have to pay a mortgage. They can't afford to take as much risks as that 17-year-old can. Right. So, I mean, what it means to everybody is sort of just, it's sort of different. But at the end of the day, I think, and this is what I tried to say to Dave when we were talking about Uber and Airbnb, is that a definition that I've settled on recently and I'm pretty happy with is that agorism is it's a form of entrepreneurship. It's a unique form of entrepreneurship where you seek not only profit but also disruption. Whereas in anarcho-capitalism, in that model, the entrepreneur seeks profit and profit alone. Whereas in the agorist model, we're seeking profit, but we're also trying to disrupt the state. And that's why I sort of count some of the more disruptive firms like Uber and Airbnb and Lyft as sort of not agorist, but agorist friendly or sort of bordering on agorism. If you can decartelize the taxi industry, I'm pretty happy with you.
Yeah, which that's a common thing, which I don't know if it's necessarily a David understand, or maybe he kind of was falling to that trap of the idea of some people have of agorism, and they'll say stuff like, well, not everyone go in the black market. It's like, okay, I get that, but everyone can go in the gray market to some extent.
Right.
Maybe,
and that
maybe be the slightest tinge of gray, maybe not very.
And that's what Konkin said to Rothbard, right? When Rothbard made his reply, Konkin was like, hey, look, anybody, you're thinking of some guy who's a mechanic, he's working 9 to 5, he's busting his hump. He can come home at 5 o'clock and work on cars underneath the table, right? He could do something like you said, engage in the gray market in some way. There's always a way that we can participate in the counter economy.
Yeah, and then I did want to add, you kind of brought up the, in caps, it's just profit for profit alone. I would actually make the case, agorists, you could even look at it from the perspective of profit from profit alone as well, because the idea, I actually think you set yourself up in a better position by separating yourself from the state, and that couldn't be any more clear in this modern day, what's going on between the lockdowns, shit, even the Canada stuff. It's if you put yourself in a position where you are set apart from the state in a way to where they're less able to interfere with your life, obviously that's a benefit. Maybe it might not be purely monetary, maybe it's just peace of mind, or maybe it's just job stability or whatever. It's being, if you are able to, the more you're able to get yourself into the agora without overdoing your risk, essentially, the better you will be. Essentially, is kind of the way I look at it.
Well, that's the whole that's the whole key.
Yeah.
And that's what sort of separates us from the sovereign citizens. Not to go down a rabbit hole. If you want to cut me off, just tell me to shut up.
No, we can keep going. I mean, if we're hitting good points, we'll do it. We can stop mid-chapter. It's fine. Keep going.
But like the only thing, like if you think about it, the only two factions of the libertarian community, right? We have all these different views: the constitutionalists, the minarchists, the ANCAPs, the agorists. The only two factions of that umbrella community that believe in defiance as a solution are the agorists and are the sovereign citizens. We differ in the sense that the sovereign citizens are openly in-your-face defiant. And that's why there is a plethora of YouTube videos of them being shot and killed on the side of the road by state troopers. Whereas agorists, we believe in operational security. We believe in concealing our actions. And most of the time that involves using the tools provided to us by crypto anarchists like Monero or cryptocurrency or Tor or hardware wallets or something like that. VPN, so on and so forth. So it's like, people say to me like all the time, well, you agorists are going to only wind up in jail. That's no way. You don't want the libertarians to wind up in jail. It's like, no. We don't think, nobody wants to go to jail. We're not advocating for that. We're not telling people to go get locked up or anything like that. We believe in being free, but in sort of like my buddy Spirko says, be the gray man, blend into the background, like go into the shadows. Don't let them see you. Don't let them see how you're operating. That's the key.
Yeah. And maybe not even necessarily a gray man. It's you can even be out in the open as long as you understand the consequences and have set yourself up. Like if you're fully aware of how the law works in this given thing, and you're likely to receive this fine if the government doesn't just decide to have a fucking make an example out of you like a Ross Ulbricht or something. But right. For the most part, you have a general understanding, hey, this given action will likely result in this given consequence if I get caught, and there's this probably roughly % chance of me getting caught. And, do I move forward? Do I not? I mean, obviously, I guess that's kind of a little bit of a gray market, like a gray man type thing. But, I mean, you can kind of be open about it, too, depending on what your given thing is. Because, I mean, you could be a CEO of a major company and still be engaging in the gray market by finding ways to manipulate the tax code, or even flagrantly disregarding the tax code, but realizing, like, like who was it? I don't know if it was you brought it up. There's some major, who's like the big money guy? Buffett? Not Jimmy Buffett. That's the singer, right? Warren Buffett. I don't remember where I heard it somewhere, but someone's saying that for years he didn't pay taxes because he knew he could make more money off of he knew the consequence of not paying the taxes, but he knew that he would make more money off of that money he would give them than he could get fined. Right. So he just wouldn't pay the taxes. So.
Genius. I love it. I mean, how do you not respect that? You know what I mean? Like I can earn more money with this money than I'm going to owe you. So
I think eventually someone was telling me they kind of cracked down, like, listen here, fucker. But at that point, he already made so much money and came out the winner. I was like, okay, all right, you got me.
Brilliant.
All right, going from an agorist society to a statist one should be uphill work, equivalent to a path of high negative entropy in physics. After all, once one is living in and understanding a well-run free society, why would one wish to return to systematic coercion, plunder, and anxiety? Spreading ignorance and irrationality among the knowledgeable and rational is difficult. Mystifying that which is already clearly understood is nearly impossible. The agorist society should be fairly stable relative to decadence, though highly open to improvement. I don't know if you have anything to add that. Let me know if you do. Let us run backward. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right, let us run backward in time, like running a film in reverse from the agorist society to the present state of society. What will we expect to see? Oh, he did this in the agorist primer as well, which I covered with Caleb. We'll see if he kind of characterizes it the same way or if it got changed. Keep in mind, for those listening, this book came out before an agorist primer, so if you're trying to compare the two, if you watch both, how he runs this down, so if there's any differences, this is the one that came first, so you can see if maybe he changed his mind a little bit and how he presented it. Because I think we had talked about this earlier and how he presented it, kind of like almost you'd be foolish to fall into it, which is like, well, this has kind of happened before, sort of. But anyways, pockets of statism, mostly contiguous in territory, since the state requires regional monopolies, would first appear. The remaining victims are becoming more and more aware of the wonderful free world around them and evaporating from these pockets. Large syndicates of market protection agencies are containing the state by defending those who have signed up for protection insurance. Most important, those outside the statist pockets or sub-societies are enjoying an agorist society save for a higher cost of insurance premiums and some care as to where they travel. The agorists could coexist with statists at this point, maintaining an isolationist foreign policy, since the cost of invasion and liberation of statist sub-societies would be higher than immediate returns, unless the state launches an all-out last aggression. Go ahead.
So just to hop in real quick, he says those outside the statist pockets or sub-societies are enjoying an agorist society, save for higher cost of insurance premiums and some care as to where they travel. That sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? I mean, right now, you can get Obamacare and you can get a shitty health insurance plan, or you can pay a little bit more and get a real health insurance plan. If you want to deal with the state's lack of or poor provision of security and policing services, you have to get your own insurance. So right now, you're probably paying higher insurance premiums than you otherwise would. And some cares where they travel. And you can't travel, right? You can't travel out of the country because you need to get shot up by Pfizer if you do. So again, he's writing this in the 80s. It's pretty prescient stuff here, guys.
Yeah. No, definitely. There is, however, no real reason to imagine that the remaining victims will choose to remain oppressed when the libertarian alternative is so visible and accessible. The state's areas are like a supersaturated solution ready to precipitate anarchy. Run backward another step and we find the situation reversed. We find larger sectors of society under statism and smaller ones living as agorically. All right, that's a weird. I would say agoristically, but all right. Agorically. All right, I don't know why I don't like that word. It throws me off. All right. However, there is one visible difference. The agorists need not be territorially contiguous. They can live anywhere, though they will tend to associate with their fellow agorists not only for social reinforcement, for ease and profitability of trade. Not to go off on a tangent, but this kind of reminds me or makes me think of the push these days a lot of people make, and I do as well. I say, I mean, if you're able to, obviously it depends on your situation, just like anything. I'm not saying no matter the cost, do this, but I think people should, at this current state in time, probably move to red states, probably move to rural areas. And I mean, ideally, New Hampshire or Florida or like was it South Dakota or North Dakota? But
South
one of those
Dakota.
places. Obviously, it depends on your values, what you're trying to do. If you, it completely, ranges. I know you were in New Jersey and you were kind of living up in some ways. Like the more the state cracks down in some regards, the more opportunities there are for counter-economically minded people. But there comes a certain point where like, all right, I need to move, and that kind of reminds me of that a little bit. If you can, you may want to consider it. It may be beneficial. I'm not saying we should do the New Hampshire thing. That never really came up in a discussion with Dave. That was one thing I was going to bring up if we had time. Because my thoughts on the New Hampshire thing is I actually don't think we should all centralize in one location.
No.
And that's kind of the idea. But I do like the idea of concentrating within certain rough ideas, like say it would be rural areas, certain states. But it becomes a little bit more of a cohesive network, So
I mean, I agree to an extent. Conklin has a great article called Anarcho-Zionism, which we republished at newlibertarian.io. If anyone wants to read it, they can just check it out there. It's obviously available for free. But I think that's a whole other story. But you're right, though. We shouldn't concentrate for the same reasons that you just said. You don't want to sort of put all your eggs in one basket for the state to just come and attack. Yeah. Also, we've seen what happens when we secede, right? We've tried that before, and last time the federal government genocided 700,000 of us under the first American Caesar, Abraham Lincoln. But I actually disagree with your interpretation of what he's saying here. I don't think he's calling for us to sort of unite geographically. I think he's saying the opposite. I think he's saying that we can have pockets of agorists in California and New York, in Florida, in South Dakota, in Texas, and all over, whether in places that are tyrannical or free, is sort of irrelevant because we agorists have chosen a life of defiance. We are already free. Again, he says here that it's likely that we'll cooperate for social reinforcement and ease and profitability of trade. How many agorists I mean, I don't know about you, but I work with agorists from all around the world. Lily Forrester is in Mexico. Her and I work together every day on Agora Threads designs, and she did the design for the book. She wrote the foreword. I work with Derek Bros, who's in Mexico, John Bush, who's in Texas. I mean, we Agorists are working. James Corbett is in Japan. I mean, we are literally sort of, as he's saying here, concentrating pockets all around the world, in places with varying degrees of statism and oppression, and we're everywhere.
Yeah,
and
I'm kind of.
soon those
I actually
pockets
think
grow and grow and grow. No,
yeah, I
that's
actually
all.
think we're kind of saying the same thing, because that's what I'm saying. I do think, like, if you're in a position where you can move to an area more conducive to like agoristic type tendencies,
Oh yeah, you
you'll
have a
probably do it. But
responsibility.
that's what I'm saying. It's so, like, if you're in a city, you know, maybe find an area that with
Oh
people
yeah.
more like you. If you're able to move to a rural area where you can find a larger group, if you're able to move to a better state where there's even bigger group, that's kind of getting. I'm not saying entirely, but, you know, kind of sort of group up. Obviously, naturally, there are going to be areas that have larger concentrations, but I don't think you should have or be striving for one place for all the concentration.
It also depends on what you're doing. I remember before I left home, there was a cop in Brooklyn, and I guess the way it works up in New York, it's like impossible to get a gun. And so, like, what they do, if you apply for a carry permit, it goes to some like NYPD detective's desk, and his job is just to throw a rubber stamp on it and deny you. Well, this guy was taking bribes under the table from the Jewish community, from the Hasidics in Brooklyn. And he was making a fortune writing out these fake gun permits to people. But he was making the world a better place by doing it. So, for example, in that guy's case, it's better for us to have him in Brooklyn, in the center of statism, than it is to have him in Texas or Florida, right? We want him doing what he's doing over there. We don't need him here right now. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it also depends on what you're doing and what you're getting away with and how much you can get away with.
No, I agree. I mean, but I do think at some point for that guy, there may be a point where it becomes too much of a crackdown where he chooses to move elsewhere.
Oh yeah, he went to jail. Yeah.
Yeah. Not what I was getting at him going to jail, but you know what I mean? All right. It's always safer and more profitable to deal with more trustworthy customers and suppliers. The tendency is for greater association among more agorist individuals and for disassociation with more status elements. So he's kind of saying again what we kind of just said. So I'm kind of getting at too. I mean, it depends on what you're doing. Like with him, if his thing is giving out fake gun permits, he's going to want to be in a place that actually has people have a demand for that. But now if you're someone who wants to, you know, I don't know, raise cows and slaughter them and sell them to people with just cash and not have
Can't
to
do that in New York.
taxes. Yeah, you'd be better off. You're going to find a larger concentration of people in a more rural area, you know? So that's kind of how the lines are drawn right now. To some extent, it'll probably shift as time goes on. Those bubbles will grow. All right. This tendency is not only theoretically strong, it already exists in embryonic practice today. Some easily defendable territories, perhaps in space or islands in the ocean or under the sun or big city ghettos, may be almost entirely agorist, where the state is impotent to crush them. Most agorists, though, will live within status-claimed areas. There will be a spectrum of the degree of agorism in most individuals as there is today, with a few benefiting from the state being highly status, a few fully conscious of the agorist alternative and competent at living free to the hilt, and the rest in the middle with varying degrees of confusion. And that's very important that we were getting at this earlier. And that was just something that kind of came up in the Dave discussion as well, where it's agorism is not a binary, it's a spectrum. Not to sound like once again, a foofy leftist, like, gender's a spectrum or some shit. But when it comes to agorism, it really is. And no matter where, as long as you're attempting to get further along that spectrum or and we're not saying you have to jump to one or the other, or you're less of an agorist if you aren't completely in the black or whatever. But the idea is to kind of try to some extent.
Yeah.
That's
as long as you're aware that you're on the spectrum and you're trying to move in the right direction, that's all that counts.
I think most of us are aware we're on the spectrums.
Yeah, especially the libertarians.
All right. Finally, we step back to where there exists only a handful who understand agorism. The vast majority perceiving illusory gains from the existence of the state or unable to perceive an alternative, and the statists themselves, the government apparatus, and the class defined by receiving a net gain from the state's intervention in the market. This is a description of our present society. We are home. All right, yeah. We're just only a handful. Yeah, we're perceiving illusory gains. Yeah, I was trying to think if I had anything to say on that. Yeah, just kind of describing the current situation. All right, before we reverse course and describe the path from statism to agorism, let's look around at our present society with our newly acquired agorist perception. Much as a traveler who returns home and sees things in a new light from what he or she has learned from foreign lands and ways of life, we may gain new insights on our present circumstances. Besides a few enlightened new libertarians, which, by the way, that was one of his terms he kind of coined to describe agorism, or agorists in general, was new libertarians. Not all of his terms caught on as much as others. Tolerated in the more liberal statist areas of the globe. Toleration exists to the degree of libertarian contamination of statism. We now perceive something else. Large numbers on people who are acting in an agorist manner with little understanding of any theory, but who are induced by material gain to evade, avoid, or defy the state. Surely they have potential. And here it is. We're going to do a good spot. That's a good point. And this is something we've brought up before. And I do think, there's one thing Dave brought up, that we're conflating things. And maybe there's some like linguistic thing that we could figure out to describe it more apt. Because there are people who aren't necessarily agorists, but are engaging in agorism and don't even realize it. So
when I was in high school, and I'm just trying to do the math, make sure the statute of limitations have expired here, but I was doing all kinds of bad shit, and I had no concept of Rothbard or Mises or Konkin. I didn't know who these people were. I was sort of libertarian-ish, just, in my own way, like, doing live and let live, that kind of way. But I was sort of disinterested in a lot of this stuff. But at the same time, I was selling weed. I was doing a whole bunch of stuff that was in accord with the non-aggression principle, but it was also engaging in an entrepreneurial fashion with the gray and black markets, because I was just a criminal at this point in my life. I wasn't like a philosopher or an agorist. I was just a criminal, but I didn't know it at the time. But I was engaging in agorism. And it only became later on that I found Ron Paul and Konkin, and I realized what I was doing. And that was some of the most effective counter-economics I've done to this day.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good point. There's like three types. You have your agorists who are fully aware of agorism and what they're doing. You have people who engage in agorism or counter-economics or whatever, but they don't realize it. And then you have people who are aware of the theory but don't engage.
Right.
And those are...
That's, by the way, the latter of which is the worst of all, because those are the folks that understand what we're doing, the importance of what we're doing, and they still refuse to participate. So they know the evil, but they refuse to do anything about it. And that's what's so sad.
Yeah, and it's sad because it is kind of almost like there's still... I'm sure this has something to do with our, 12 or 13 years of, public indoctrination,
No
where
doubt.
you're, don't break laws, whatever. So something is still caging them to not do it, because it's almost like there's no reason to. Because once you realize it's not immoral, and really it's just a matter of not getting caught, or if you do get caught, you're willing to accept the consequences, you're in a situation to do so. It's kind of like, why not? Like, do what you can around the edges type deal.
Absolutely.
All right. In the Soviet Union, a bastion of arc statism and a nearly totally collapsed official economy, a giant black market provides the Russian, Armenian, Ukrainian, and others with everything from food to television repair to official papers and favors from the ruling class. As the Manchester Guardian Weekly reports, Burma is almost a total black market, with a government reduced to an army, police, and a few strutting politicians. In varying degrees, this is true of nearly all the second and third worlds. I was just going to finish the paragraph. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just hop in there. So, number one, I don't know if you guys have read Counter Economics from the Back Alleys to the Stars. That's sort of Konkin's piece on the Soviet Union. It's sort of like his proof for the agorist theory. And I think he's sort of drawing a little bit from that here. You can tell by like the wording that he's used is sort of the same that he uses in that book. But also he says Burma is almost a total black market, with the government reduced to an army, police, and a few strutting politicians. Nothing has changed. These people are still only an army with police and a few strutting politicians, and it's still just a black market. By the way, 3dprintergoburr.com is shipping now to Burma. It's one of the 2 conflict zones that we actually ship to. You can pay in local currency if you live in Myanmar, and we will get you a 3D printer through the hands of the junta. We'll get around the junta, and we'll get you that 3D printer. And of course, you can see the FGC 9s, pictures of the FGC 9s coming in from the Burmese tyrants. So it's working. It's still, as Conkin said, it's still a black market.
Yeah. All right. Someone brought this up, and it's kind of silly, but I wanted to make a point of it. He said, I use stimulus checks to make my meat. Is this agorism? I guess, sure, technically. But the point I want to get at is because this is one thing that came up during the whole stimulus check things. I guess he said he sold the leftovers for Moneros in the next chat. But so, yeah, I guess it is technically entirely agorism because you are, taking that money. One thing that came up a lot when we were getting those stimulus checks, a lot of people, especially libertarian types, were like, being like, well, I won't even accept this money or blah, blah, blah. And I feel like correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say the agorist thinking on that is like, yeah, give me my fucking money. Like, you're going to do it either way. Yeah. Like, I'm going to take this money and set it and try to interact with it in a way that will set myself better, in more counter economically.
Dude, the way that I look at this is very simple. Every dollar that you deprive the state of is a dollar that they can't use to murder some child on the other side of the world who you've never met before. Right? If you want them to murder children, 5 and 7-year-old girls in Yemen, then give them every dollar you can. But if you don't want to pay for that shit, then deprive them of every cent that you possibly can. Like, if you can, no matter what you could do, don't do anything illegal. I can't tell you to do that. But everything else, do whatever you can to take money out of these bastards' hands. And of course, that's just one aspect of it. But I had this conversation with Walter Block. He wrote a little bit about this in his book, Space Capitalism. I interviewed him on my podcast, The Agora, about the book. And what he says is, him and Herb Island and Bob Murphy and Murray Rothbard and Hans Hoppe, these guys worked at state universities and they collected a paycheck from the state. Does that make them not libertarian? Of course not. Who in the right mind would call Murray Rothbard and Walter Block not libertarian? You have to be a nut to say something like this. So it can't be said, just a quick reductio, it can't be said that collecting money from the state makes you unlibertarian, right? If that's the case, then Murray Rothbard, the father of libertarianism, isn't a libertarian. So that's just sort of blown out of the water as far as I'm concerned.
I would say, though, the ideal is to get to a point where you aren't getting, I guess not necessarily aren't, but don't need it, you kind of deal, I guess. Like, I would say never rely on it. Yeah.
Of course. But look, if you're in a position to take money from them, take every penny that you can take from these people. Take it all. Drain them until they have nothing left. Because all that money is going to be used against you, your friends, your family, people you've never met before, and it's going to be your responsibility, especially if you've paid voluntarily, right? Every dollar that we give them, every dollar that we use, it's inflated away by the bankers. That's used to our detriment, and we are, I believe, morally responsible for a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of people say, oh, they'll just print more, and that's true, but it's still like, okay, you're still robbing them of their economic value, because especially if you're doing it in a way to take value away from it and put it in places where their actual value, whether that be crypto, gold, actual physical things, things that generate value for you. Like for me with my like the cat breeding, like if I invest it in buying another female, that's something that's going to continue to make more value for me as opposed to for the state. So, whatever you can.
It's so with these side hustles, it's one thing to like have the side hustle and like exist in the gray market and sort of minimize your tax burden, I'll say, right? That's one aspect of agorism. But then when you start accepting alternative currencies, crypto, precious metals, barter, then you sort of have a multiplier effect on the disruption that you're creating, right? Because now it's not just a matter of you're minimizing your taxes. It's also that you're screwing up the Fed and the demand for the dollar on top of it. So you're really sort of piling one disruption on top of another.
All right. What of the first world? In the social democrat countries, the black market is smaller because the white market of legally accepted market transactions is larger. But the former is still quite prominent. Italy, for example, has a problem of a large part of its civil service, which works officially from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m., working unofficially at various jobs the rest of the day to earn black money. The Netherlands has a large black market in housing because of the high regulation of this industry. Denmark has a tax evasion movement so large that those in it seduced to politics have formed the second largest party. And these are only the grossest examples that the press has been able or willing to cover. Currency controls are evaded rampantly. In France, for example, everyone is assumed to have a large gold stash, and trips to Switzerland for more than touring and skiing are commonplace. To appreciate fully the extent of this counter-economic activity, one must view the relatively free capitalist economies. Let us look at the black and gray markets in North America and remember that this is the case of lowest activity in the world today. According to American Internal Revenue Service, at least 20 million people belong to the underground economy of tax evaders using cash or barter exchange to avoid detections of transactions. Millions keep money in gold or in foreign accounts to avoid the hidden taxation of inflation. Millions of illegal aliens are employed according to the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Millions more deal or consume marijuana, cocaine, and other prescribed drugs, including Latril, tryptophan, anti-AIDS drugs, and other forbidden medical material. The anti-AIDS one's a good example because they had the Dallas Buyers Club, and everyone has seen that.
Oh yeah,
that ties
that's one of
into
my
modern day
favorite
stuff with
Agorist
Fauci.
movies.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're 100% right. Everything he said. Look how prescient it all is. Drugs that are forbidden by medical forbidden medical material, ivermectin, right? Does that sound familiar? Illegal aliens, that's still an issue today. And Konkin, by the way, himself was an illegal immigrant. This is what a lot of libertarians who argue against immigration don't understand. Konkin was an illegal immigrant who was deported, snuck back into the country, was deported again, and came back again for a second time. And of course, millions keep money in gold or foreign accounts to avoid the hidden taxation of inflation. I've got precious metals here. I'm all in on crypto and precious metals. So for these exact reasons, by the way, of course, I'm not a tax evader. I would never do anything like that. But I think I would also argue that the underground economy is probably much larger than 20 million people today.
Yeah. I want to bring this up. This is a great example. Barbers. I barter for haircuts all the time. We'll trade out electric work for haircuts. I mean, most people who get their haircut, or especially dudes, are aware. Most of the time, a lot of places don't even accept card. They will just take cash, and that's it. And like, do you really think they're reporting all that? Like, this is a great example of kind of what he was kind of getting at. That even in some of the capitalist societies where it's like, okay, this is on the up and up, because this is a perfect example of a gray market activity because they're completely on the up and up. People go to them. Tons of people of differing views of whether taxes, whatever, go to them. They give them money. I'm sure most of them they thought about deeply would realize, they're probably not claiming all this, and it's no issue. They move on with their day and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and not to pick on Dave because he's not here, but I mean, and also Rothbard made this argument as well. So I guess I could just say Rothbard, but this is just proof that anybody can engage in agorist and counter economics, right? So like, even if you have like a regular 9 to 5, like you're a barber or something like that, even still, you're able to engage somehow, some way in the counter economy, and that's the proof in the pudding right there.
Yeah, and like, even though I know, like, I have my business and I mostly try to engage in cash, but like, we brought bartering. I've bartered before for my stuff. Like, we've gotten tattoos for cats before, me and my wife. Like,
yeah,
I mean, that's value to us. Like, anyone who's like understands economics knows that value isn't necessarily just the paper money or gold or whatever. It's what you ascribe to it. It's subjective. So.
Yeah, when I was at the Bitcoin conference in Miami, someone came up to me and was like, "Hey, Sal, can I buy a copy of your book, Anti-Politics?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And they broke out a silver coin and were like, "Would you take this?" And I said, "Absolutely." Took the silver coin, gave them a copy of the book. No fiat currency, no Federal Reserve notes required.
Yeah, someone.
Of course, I pay taxes on that.
Yeah. I don't want to keep going on. Someone brought up digitalization of money as a big problem. I do want to address that real quick. With any new technology, there's going to be, ways in which the state can get their dirty dick in there, and then, ways that it can be used for freedom. And that's a good example. I'm sure. Now, I don't know a lot about crypto. I know you do. I don't want to get on a big tangent, but there are obviously going to be crypto type stuff that are going to be more amenable to the state, and then others that are less so. Especially this give, send, go shit going on in Canada. That's a big example. They're talking about like freezing wallets and shit. So
I'm not too familiar with give, send, go. I think that these CBDC, central bank digital currencies, the whole point is they can sort of inject money into the economy and then control how you spend it so that you can't use it for Bitcoin purchases or gold or silver purchases or cryptocurrency purchases. They want you out there and spending it to consume. They want you to spend it at Target and Walmart, to go out to eat with your family, to go to the movies. They want you out there spending so you can sort of keep this Ponzi scheme alive. They don't want you to just, stick underneath the mattress. And that's what the CBDCs are all about. But like you said, I agree with what you said 100%. Any new technology, the state has a history of, we know that the state is going to use it against us, but we're also going to use it against them. And history shows that we usually win that battle.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have, when it comes to entrepreneurship, decentralized, I mean, this is the whole idea of the free market, just all these different people doing different things that benefit them to their own personal, I mean,
Who
the state.
has used blockchain technology more effectively, the state or Agorist? Who's used additive manufacturing more effectively, the state or Agorist? Who's used cryptography, encryption, so on and so forth, right? Like they're just figuring out now how to deal with Bitcoin, like BTC, the original, the Model T. We are moving on to like tokenized real estate and like tokenized cars and shit like that. They can't keep up with us. And
they're just playing catch up.
Yeah, and they're not anywhere close.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that as they're playing catch up, it's a production predation thing. The production pretty much always outpaces predation, and as time goes on, it seems to be we keep getting a even further and further lead. And it's about, and I guess we kind of have that politics for agorism thing. It's kind of like, instead of putting your time and energy into something that may have a marginal difference or a negative difference or make no difference at all, it'd be better to take that time and effort and put it into something that helps accelerate our ability for production to outpace their predation even more and more and more. So
yeah, and that's the hard part. That's the challenge for Agorist entrepreneurs, is that we have to earn enough that we can subsist after they've already leached away a little bit from us, and we have to do it in a way that makes that we can retain some degree of independence, and that's not always the easiest thing to do.
Yeah. All right, and there are all the practitioners of victimless crimes. Besides drug use, there's prostitution, pornography, bootlegging, false identification papers, gambling, and prescribed sexual conduct between consenting adults. Regardless of reform movements to gain political acceptance of these acts, the population has chosen to act now, and by doing so are creating a counter economy. It doesn't stop here, though. Since the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit was enacted federally in the U.S., most Americans have become counter-economic drivers. The trucking industry has developed CB communications to evade state enforcement of regulations. For independents who can make 4 runs at 75 miles per hour rather than 3 runs at 55 miles per hour, counter-economic driving is a question of survival. The ancient custom of smuggling thrives today, from bootloads of marijuana and foreign appliances with high tariffs and truckloads of people from less developed countries to the tourists stashing a little extra in their luggage and not reporting it to customs agents. Go ahead.
So one of the things that some people would do back up north in New York and New Jersey is they would rent out a Ryder truck, they would drive down to Virginia, North Carolina, and they would fill it up with cigarettes, drive back to New York, where the price of cigarettes was like $14 a pack, and sell them at wholesale prices to bodega owners and stuff like that. So every now and then you'd walk into some Indian shop. I don't smoke anymore, but I used to. And I'd buy a pack of Marlboro, flip it over, and it would be like North Carolina or Virginia or something like that, because they were smuggling them in to avoid these high taxes from Emperor Cuomo.
Yeah. No, I remember when I used to live in Tennessee. Like I was like, I mean, I was in the country, a really rural area, so I was dipping in fucking high school, and half the time they didn't care and would sell it to us. Obviously, that may not be ideal, but point I'm getting at is I would literally get pocket change, or just like change I could scrounge out of my car to get a can of dip. It'd be like $2 or less. Whereas like I don't dip anymore, but if I were to now, like even in Florida, it's like, I don't know, probably like $6 plus a can. And, I mean, I guess that's obviously going to be attributed to inflation and stuff. But, this stuff happens where it's like, the state, puts these shit.
Oh, yeah. One of the easiest, simplest forms of counter economics is to drive across a state line, buy something that has a lower tax rate, bring it back to a place where it has a higher tax rate, and sell it at a discounted price. It's one of the easiest ways to engage the counter economy.
Yeah, someone just said in Ireland they increased the price of alcohol again, and people are just going up to Northern Ireland buy it for nearly half the price. I mean, a good example of this is like a lot of places. I know in Tennessee there were certain counties that would have weird alcohol laws about like certain days or after certain times, and you would just go to the next county. Like it's just this annoying thing you have to work around.
They only shoot themselves in the foot, and counter-economic activity shows them that they're just shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah. All right. Nearly everyone engages in some sort of misrepresentation or misdirection on their tax forms, off-the-books payments for services, unreported trade with relatives, and illegal sexual positions with their mates.
So, if anybody has ever seen Kerry Packer, go on YouTube and check out the Kerry Packer testimony in front of the Australian Parliament. It's one of the most legendary testimonies you'll ever see. And one of the things that they say, they have this sort of really great back and forth that libertarians would love. But at one point, they accused him of like tax evasion or something like that. He goes, I haven't evaded taxes. I've minimized my taxes. And Kerry Packer says, anyone out there who's not minimizing their tax burden needs to have their head checked. I mean, anybody who, he says, why? He says, I see no reason why we should give you guys more money, considering how poorly you spend it now. And I think he's 100% right, and he sort of hits the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah. Someone brought the tobacco thing again. It reminded me when I was active duty military. When I was deployed, it would be borderline impossible to get a hold of tobacco, and even a counter economy formed there, even on a military base, like in the Middle East.
Yeah,
there would be people who would send over like in packages, tons of them, and then they would sell them for absorbent prices, but cheaper than you would be able to get from there. So the counter economy thrives everywhere.
Roger Ver, the owner of Bitcoin.com, a buddy of mine, he served time in a federal prison for bullshit. Really, they were just looking for a reason to put him away, and he was selling fireworks on eBay or something like that. So they got him for like moving explosives through the mail. It was a really trumped up bullshit charge because he had said some shit publicly about the ATF that was completely true, but that's another story.
Yeah,
I bring this up because he one of the things he tells me is that he had read Mises and Rothbard and all this economics. Then he goes to prison and he sees people trading cigarettes and bartering for different stuff. And he says, I saw all these ideas put into practice. That's how he knew when Satoshi came out with the white paper in 2008, that he knew something was there. And that's how he was able to jump in and invest so early. And I think that's true of a lot of early investors in cryptocurrency. We only got into it. I know it's true in my case. I was only able to see the value of it because of people like Walter Block and Peter Schiff and Tom Woods and a lot of these Misesian economists who taught me all this shit.
Yeah, I highly suggest you guys go check out Roger Ver if you haven't heard of him. I've seen him on a few things, and like hearing him talk about his story is great. And he's actually one of the many arguments against political action, because that happened when he was going through the political route, because he thought he was going to make a difference, and he went hard as fuck, like we would want him to if he were going to go that route, and it bit him in the ass, which obviously that's not the only argument against political action, because I know a lot of like the Mises Caucus people would say, like, well, we're in a position where we kind of can do that, whatever, but there's other arguments, but that's definitely an argument, and he got railroaded for it. So
yeah, and if you guys are familiar with Ben Mesrich, he has that movie The Social Network, about the founding of Facebook. He also came out with another book more recently called Bitcoin Billionaires is what it's called. And it's the story of like the original Bitcoiners and how they came to be. And one of them is Roger Ver. So if you want to learn more about Roger, check out Ben Mesrich, of course, is a great storyteller. That's why his book was so successful. And it probably will end up being a movie one day. I'm almost guarantee that Roger will wind up in some movie about the origins of Bitcoin one day. So check it out, familiarize yourself with him, and also familiarize yourself with why he prefers Bitcoin Cash, which is another topic for discussion one day.
All right, to some extent, then, everybody is a counter-economist, and this is predictable from libertarian theory. Nearly every aspect of human action has status legislation prohibiting, regulating, or controlling it. These laws are so numerous that a libertarian party that prevented any new legislation and briskly repealed 10 or 20 laws a session would not have significantly repealed the state, let alone this mechanism itself, for millennia. Right,
Which
you
they
look like
don't, they don't repeal 10 or 20 laws a session. They can't even
yeah.
get a say in one session. So it's like,
Yeah, which I mean, that's why it does always come down to just arguing the messaging thing. Because if you're actually doing
all the
political,
time.
yeah, if you're only arguing politically, it's like, well, that's pretty easy to slap down. Like, okay, let's
Yeah,
look at your
right.
track record. Like Conkin was actually being pretty generous in this one right here.
Right.
So
For sure.
uh, and that's not to say there aren't places that have examples of libertarian parties or even Republicans or Democrats who are or libertarians who run as Republicans or Democrats have positive effects. No one's saying there aren't positive effects in some places, but it's obviously always going to be outpaced by the by counter economics essentially. So
Exactly.
it's more of an aspect of like, are there places you could better put your energy? And I would also make the social science argument of, by doing that, those positives end up building this confidence in other people to engage in that way. Even if you could make the case that some given action or given person made a difference in a positive way, it's like, well, okay, how many people do they suck into this system to do the same thing when they could be doing other things? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
True.
Obviously, the state is unable to obtain enforcement of its edicts. Yet the state continues. And if everyone is somewhat counter-economic, why hasn't the counter-economy overwhelmed the economy? Outside of North America, we can add the effect of imperialism. The Soviet Union has received support from the more developed countries in the 1930s in large quantities of instruments of violence during World War II. Even today, trade, heavily subsidized by non-repayable loans, props up the Soviet and now Chinese regimes. This flow of capital, or anti-capital, being destructive of value from both blocs, along with military aid, maintains regimes over the rest of the globe. But that does not explain the North American case. You're going to say
So
something?
one of the one of the stories I love is Carl Hess, who was one of the best, one of my favorite agorists ever live. And one of the great things that he used to do is Carl Hess would actively work with the mafia to try and prevent the flow of anti-capital into the hands of the Soviets. So he would actively work with the mafia to prevent sort of this cash flow going into the Soviet Union. Among other things, Carl Hess did all sorts of great stuff. He would airdrop guns into Havana, Cuba during rallies and stuff like that. Like, just a real badass dude. And one of the things he does is what Conkin's talking about here. I'm pretty sure Conkin got this vis-a-vis his friendship with Hess, knowing what Hess's underground activities were.
All right. What exists everywhere on earth that allows the state to continue is the sanction of the victim. Every victim of statism has internalized the state to some degree. The IRS's annual proclamation that the income tax depends on voluntary compliance is ironically true. Should the taxpayers completely cut off the blood supply, the vampire state would helplessly perish. Its unpaid police and army deserting almost immediately, defanging the monster. If everyone abandoned legal tender for gold and goods and contracts and other exchanges, it is doubtful that even taxation could sustain the modern state.
And this is sort of, we're getting into sort of echoes of the old school left anarchists here. Like when you read this, like, I don't know about you guys, but Benjamin Tucker is jumping out at me. Leo Tolstoy is jumping out at me when I read these words. This is like, this paragraph could have easily been in Tucker's journal or in one of Tolstoy's writings. It jumps right out of those pages.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would highly suggest anyone listening. I've been working on my anarchist handbook series. I'm not completely done, but I did the Benjamin Tucker episode with Ace Archist on Twitter. For those who are aware of him,
Tucker's the man.
Yes, it was a great. The
Tucker's the
Tucker
man.
chapter is great. He's very interesting, and it's funny because he actually, it was, I guess, to kind of get to your point a little bit, what you were getting at in the Dave episode, like, yeah, their property, their economics were off, but if you look at it, he still kind of comes to the same end result action. And I don't think he would advocate for going to steal people from steal things from private individuals or whatever. He had the supply theory of value or whatever, but like, or not supply, but you know what I mean. But
well, Tucker was more friendly to private. He wasn't a private. He wasn't like a capitalist or a Rothbardian by any measure, but he was certainly more, because of his individualist outlook. He was much more keen on the rights of the individual, and one of them being property rights. That also became, by the way, chapter 15 of Anti-Politics was Benjamin Tucker.
Yeah. But yeah, if you guys want an introduction, go check out that episode to Tucker. I was very impressed with it, especially because it's been interesting reading that book and reading into some
All
more of the
those
lefty
guys.
anarchists. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, we're so used to like, we read what? Rothbard. That's what people read today. That's it. That's the only really anarchist, maybe a little bit of Hop, maybe some Block, but that's really it. People really should do their homework here. Go back, take your time, read Proud Dune, read Tucker, Tolstoy, even read the bad guys, right? Read Bakunin, read the bomb throwers, and find out why they were wrong.
Yeah, a lot of them were like, yeah, they would be like, oh, property isn't real or whatever, but they wouldn't like, especially like mutualists and stuff, they wouldn't advocate actually taking property from people. They were very nonviolent in that sense. So they would be the ideal anarchists to live by. Like, yeah, they don't believe you have a right to property, but they're not going to do anything about it. So who gives a fuck?
Right.
So, yeah. This is where the state's control of education and the information media, either directly or through ruling class ownership, becomes crucial. In earlier days, the established priesthood served the function to sanctify the king and the aristocracy, to mystify the relations of oppression, and to induce guilt in evaders and resistors. The disestablishment of religion has put this burden on the new intellectual class, what the Russians call the intelligentsia. Some intellectuals holding truth as their highest value, as did earlier dissenting theologians and clerics, do work at clarifying rather than mystifying, but they are dismissed or reviled and kept away from state and foundation-controlled income. This is a very crucial point in Anatomy of the State, which I know all of us people coming from that tradition are very aware of. That is something he really touches on, that the intellectual class, or whatever you want to call it, they become an arm of the state because they are funded by the state. To some extent. I know we brought up Rothbard were funded by the state to some extent. Luckily, it didn't corrupt them, but for many, it's one of those things where like it may not be this overt thing, but there's an underlying subtext of you get further if you're saying the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We call these court historians, right? These are the people that they tell the story of history on behalf of the state. That's why revisionist accounts of history are so important. That's why they're so key to a really robust understanding of libertarian philosophy. You really have to understand revisionist history to get it, because you have to understand where all those lies came into place.
Yeah. Thus is the phenomenon of dissidence and revisionism created. And thus is the attitude of anti-intellectualism generated among the populace, who suspect or incompletely understand the function of the court intellectual. Know well how anarchist intellectuals are attacked and repressed under every state, and those arguing for an overthrow of the present ruling class, even only to replace it with another, are suppressed. Those who propose changes that eliminate some beneficiaries of the state and add others are often lauded by the benefiting elements of the higher circles and attacked by the potential losers. A common characteristic of most hardened black marketeers is their guilt.
Not me.
They wish to make their bundle and return to straight society. And this is kind of something we were getting at earlier, which is this is kind of something built in that people just can't help it. Bootleggers and hookers all long someday for reacceptance in society, even when they form a supportive sub-society of outcasts. Yet there have been exceptions to this phenomenon of longing for acceptance. The religious dissenting communities of the 1700s, the political utopian communities of the 1800s, and most recently the counterculture of the hippies and the New Left. New Left referring to like the agorists, and I guess probably other certain sections you would consider that too.
Well, check out Rothbard's book, Never a Dull Moment, which is it's as far left as Rothbard is going to go. It's certainly more of a leftist book than the one that we're reading right now. But that was a product, and Rothbard at the time was a product of the New Left. Right? He was trying to form an alliance between the old right, the Frank Chodorovs of the world, with the New Left, the Black Panthers, and so on and so forth. And that's where a lot of that comes into play.
Yeah. What they had was a conviction that their sub-society was superior to the rest of society. The fearful reaction they generated in the rest of society was a fear that they were correct. All these examples of self-sustaining sub-societies failed for one overriding reason: ignorance of economics. No social binding, no matter how beautiful, can overcome the basic glue of society, division of labor. The anti-market commune defies the only enforceable law, the law of nature. Which this is a good little point. I know we talked on like in the Dave episode, and then and a
Right.
little bit here, the lefty accusations or implications. It's like he's very much Rothbardian in his fucking economics. Rothbardian on Twitter might get a kick out of this. She watches. That's someone I know. But yeah, no, that he's very much an ANCAP in his economics in that sense. So I always say that agorism is essentially a subsection of ANCAP, in my opinion. That's kind of how I see it.
It is. Like I say, we are more Rothbardian than the Rothbardians are, and that's the truth.
Yeah. The basic organizational structure of society above the family is not the commune or tribe or extended tribe or state, but the agora. No.
By the way, just to jump in real quick, he's talking here about why voluntary communes fail, and I did shit. Now I can't think of the name of it. I wrote an article for newlibertarian.io called, I think it was like In Defense of Left Libertarianism Part 2 or something like that, where I actually went over the history of a lot of these old school communes in the 1800s, or what he's calling here political utopian communities of the 1800s. A lot of these were anarchist communities, like in New Harmony. They had an anarchist society. They would build towns all throughout the West. The Doukhobors up in Canada, they had these voluntary communes. Most of them failed and aren't around today because, as Konkin says here, they try to defy the one enforceable law of nature, the division of labor. And he of course, as always, he hits the nail on the head here. All these groups failed because they lacked poor economics. Some of them, I remember Bob Lefebvre, I think I spoke to you about. Bob Lefebvre has these series of lectures on the Mises Institute SoundCloud website, which everybody should check out, especially if you're interested in the history of anarchism, because he goes through the whole history, and he does a whole lesson on the history of these political utopian communities. And I'm almost sure that's where Konkin is drawing a lot of this from, is his time studying under Lefebvre.
Yeah. No matter how many wish communism to work and devote themselves to it, it will fail. They can hold back agorism indefinitely by great effort, but when they let go, the flow, or invisible hand, or tides of history, or profit incentive, or doing what comes naturally, or spontaneity will carry society inexorably closer to the pure agora. Why is there such resistance to eventual happiness? Psychologists have been dealing with that since they began their embryonic science. We can at least give two broad answers when it comes to socio-economic questions. Internalization of anti-principles, those that seem to be principles but are actually contrary to natural law, and the opposition of vested interests. Now we can see clearly what is needed to create a libertarian society. On the one hand, we need the education of the libertarian activists and the consciousness raising of counter-economists to libertarian understanding and mutual supportiveness. We are right, we are better, we are surviving in a moral, consistent way, and we are building a better society, a benefit to ourselves and others, our counter-economic and counter groups might affirm. Note well that libertarian activists who are not themselves full practicing counter-economists are unlikely to be convincing. Libertarian political candidates undercut everything they say of value by what they are doing. Some candidates have even held jobs in tax bureaus and defense departments. Bill Weld.
Yeah. Well, this is this sort of performative contradiction he's pointing out is what I tried to impart to Dave during our discussion. But I don't think I convinced him as such.
To be fair, I do think you may have been overseeing. I get what you were getting at. It would have been a little bit easier if it was a Bill Weld type and he had a defense job or something.
Dude, if Jesus Christ rose from the dead today, if he descended from the heavens and ran for office, I would be like, dude, you're being a hypocrite because you're telling me that you love everybody and to be good and whatnot, but at the same time you're running for political office, and you can't separate the office from its coercive nature. No matter how hard you try. I guess theoretically, hypothetically speaking, it's possible that somebody gets in there and they don't ever violate the non-aggression principle. But the likelihood of that happening, the chances are so slim to none that we can just, for the sake of discussion, say that it's not possible.
Yeah. On the other hand, we must defend ourselves against the vested interest, or at the very least, lower their oppression as much as possible. If we eschew reformist activity as counterproductive, how will we achieve that result? One way is to bring more and more people into the counter economy and lower the plunder available to the state. But evasion isn't enough. How do we protect ourselves and even counterattack? Slowly but steadily, we will move to the free society, turning more counter-economists onto libertarianism and more libertarians onto counter-economics. Finally, integrating theory and practice. I do like how he makes this point of integrating the two. That is one thing he's brought in many times in his books. The counter-economy will grow and spread to the next step we saw in our trip backward, with an ever larger agorist sub-society embedded in the state society. Some agorists may even condense into discernible districts and ghettos, or predominate on islands or in space colonies. At this point, the question of protection and defense will become important.
So just to pause real quick, we're sort of getting there, and I think later on in the book, he'll get to like the different phases of the Agorist revolution, but this is sort of where we're at now, where we can sort of see these Agorist enclaves forming in like an embryonic fashion, right? So, we have Agorist clustered in Miami right now around that sort of crypto community. There's a really vibrant crypto community in Miami clustered around the Bitcoin Center and some of the folks down there. There's another cluster of Agorists in Acapulco, in Mexico, with Lily Forrester and Derek Bros and Berwick and all those Agorists. So yeah, we're getting there. I've got friends in Australia who stick together. When I was in New York, there was all sorts of meetups that were sort of Agorist, counter-economic related. So we're almost at the point now where we have these Agorist enclaves, and over time they'll start to interconnect with one another, and they'll start to trade and do business, and it'll become a much more dynamic situation until eventually these enclaves get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the state will actually be the ones in the minority and not us.
Yeah, which I mean, to keep bringing up the Canada example, that's a great example. Like you look at the protests and how the government initially posited it as this fucking fringe movement, and now it's this huge group of people, and now the state is already, showing its hand of how authoritarian it'll be. We'll cut off your bank account. We'll even try to fuck with what crypto we can.
We'll kidnap your pets.
Yeah. So yeah, shit like that. So I mean, and it's like we're right on the verge. I mean, this is a little bit getting a little ahead in the text here, because we do go in the phases, but in the later phases when we start developing security markets or whatever,
right?
And that would be like if we had Canada, like we're right on the verge, like with the Canada thing going around. If they got to the point where they have protection agencies, it would be a very different story right now. What is going on, So
for sure,
they're already starting arrests and stuff right now. So.
It's a matter of time. If the state continues down this path, it's just a matter of time until we see that. In fact, to an extent, we already do see it in places where they failed. Dale Brown has the Detroit Threat Management, where he's providing an alternative to the failed Detroit Police Department. There was also an app that the Don't Comply crew was promoting in Texas a while back called Cell 411, where rather than calling the police, you can send out an alert on some app, and it would go out to members of your network who are also part of the Cell 411 network, and they would rush to your aid if you needed help. So it was sort of a community-based approach rather than a state or tax-funded based approach.
Yeah, and even then, the simple, it's like building blocks build upon it and create that. Because even as simple as like I live in the country, and pretty much I have the number of like all my immediate neighbors, and multiple of us have been like out of town or whatever, and be like, hey, keep an eye on my property, or like, and we would all call each other before we would ever call the cops, and so and from there things build.
I would never call the police if. Just for the record, I wouldn't. I can't imagine a case in which I would call the police. It would have to be really, really bad for me to actually call the police. I can't think of something that I would not rather handle myself than to call the police.
I mean, I'd call them after the fact because I'm not going to go hide a body. So, but I mean, depending on the scenario.
Yeah, right. I don't want to die. I mean, I'm afraid they're going to come and shoot me.
Yeah, hiding a body that gets the point in an agoristic formula that outweighs my my cost I'm willing to take. Now, in a true free society, I would just bury him in the backyard and not say anything to anyone.
Well, we're in Florida. Every place is a short ride from here. I only have to take you about an hour, and the alligators will handle the rest for me.
Yeah.
Let me just respond real quick. I see in the chat, Palou says, well, he wants to get a talk between me and Doug, the XMR guy. I actually was in a space with Doug a week or two ago, and he didn't like what I had to say about Monero. So I'm not sure he'd be willing to do it. But I'm, of course, always willing to have a discussion with anybody at any time.
Yeah. Yeah, fucking spaces are the wild, wild west of Twitter right now.
Yeah.
Using our agorist model, we can see how the protection industry must evolve. First, why do people engage in counter economics with no protection? The payoff for the risk they take is greater than their expected loss. This statement is true, of course, for all economic activity, but for counter economics, it requires special emphasis. The fundamental principle of counter economics is to trade risk for profit. The higher the expected profit, the greater risk taken. Note that if risk is lowered, a lot more would be attempted and accomplished. Surely an indicator that a free society is wealthier than an unfree one. That touches on a lot of stuff we were getting at earlier when it comes to the risk reward type thing.
Go ahead.
But I was going to say, I mean, if you're in a position where you're considering pursuing counter economics and you're doing some action that the possible consequence is likely to occur and is beyond your scope of what you can manage and not ruin yourself, I'd say you're kind of retarded to pursue it personally.
Yeah, of course.
So
yeah, no one wants to wind up in jail. You can't fight against the state from a prison cell, or I guess you can in a certain way. That's another story.
Yeah.
One thing I want to point out here. Conkin says here that he says note that if risk is lowered, a lot more would be attempted and accomplished. One of the things that myself and the folks from Agorist Nexus have been working on, and we plan on releasing this year. So just little inside info for you guys watching is we plan on releasing an Agorist DAO, an Agora DAO. We might call it the Counter DAO or Agora DAO. We're not really sure yet. It'll be tokenized, and the idea will be to provide bail relief to counter economists so that we're actually able to lower the barriers to entry, lower the risks associated with gray and black market activity, just like Conk is talking about here, so that if you get busted for some voluntary entrepreneurial activity, the Agora DAO will come to your aid. You're much more likely to engage in that activity. And that's sort of the point with what we're trying to do there. We're getting at exactly what Conkin hit here, but that's still in the works. We're still building it, and we're at least a year away from launch. So just a heads up.
By the way, for people in the chat, I've seen a few questions. If you guys do have questions you do want to ask, I mean, we are tight on time. I'm trying to knock this out because we're almost to the end. But if you do really have a question you want to ask, super chat it, and I will make the time because, I'm a true capitalist. Risk may be lowered by increasing care, taking precautions, tightening security, lock stashes, safe houses, and by trusting fewer persons of higher trustworthiness. The last indicates a high preference for dealing with fellow agorists and a strong economic incentive that binds an agorist sub-society and provides an incentive to recruit or support recruitment into that sub-society. Counter-economic entrepreneurs have an incentive to provide better security devices, places of concealment, instructions to aid evasion, and to screen potential customers and suppliers for other counter-economic entrepreneurs. And thus is the counter-economic protection industry born. As it grows, it may begin ensuring against busts, lowering counter-economic risks further, and accelerating counter-economic growth. Just like you're in this book right now. So, all right. Then it may provide lookouts and guarded areas of safekeeping with alarm systems and high-tech concealment mechanisms. Guards may be provided against real criminals other than the state. Already, many residential, business, and even minority districts employ private patrols, having given up on the state's alleged protection of property, which you brought up before. Yeah. So, with Detroit threat management. Yeah. And you know what? Like you've brought it before, he's not even an anarchist, ANCAP, whatever. Like he's just a dude who's just like, you know, the
Right.
incentives drive him a certain way, and he's driven
That's
to
what
it.
you were talking about earlier. It's exactly what you were saying earlier.
Yeah. Along the way, the risk of contract violation between counter-economic traders will be lowered by arbitration. Then the protection agencies will start providing contract enforcement between agorists, although the greatest enforcer in the early stages will be a state to which one can betray the other. Yet that act would quickly result in one's expulsion from the sub-society, so an internal enforcement mechanism will be valued. In the final stages, counter-economist transactions with statists will be enforceable by the protection agencies and the agorists, thus protected against the criminality of the state. At this point, we have reached the final step before the achievement of a libertarian society. Society is divided between large and violent agorist areas and rapidly shrinking statist sectors. We stand on the brink of revolution, which I do have to say, I do love how he integrates revolution into his concept of agorism, because this is a common thing that infiltrates the constitutionalists, ANCAPs, whatever, the idea of revolution. And colloquially speaking, I actually think revolution is the big dumb. Like, you know, violent revolution in that sense. Technically, even agorist revolution will be violent at some point, but it's more of a violence in achieving restitution, not in just wanton violence, essentially.
Even then, the possibilities for violence will be tempered and minimized.
Yes. Yeah, because the idea is not just to do violence and to, take down the oppressors or whatever. And generally speaking, most revolutions end up becoming co-opted. And that's one of the big issues.
A lot of libertarians and ANCAPs want to behead these politicians. They want Pelosi swing from a telephone pole.
I mean, I feel
want my money back. I just want my money back. I don't give a shit what this bitch does. I just want her to give me my goddamn money back, and she can go about her life, and I'll go about my life.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't be upset if those happened, but at the same time, these are people who mean basically nothing to me. So the money back would be the ideal. Like whether they get some sort of cosmic justice, it's really not something I'm going to overly concern myself with.
The problem with killing these politicians is that you deny their victims the opportunity for restitution. Right? If you kill Pelosi, then she can't pay her victims back, and you become responsible for paying them back.
Yeah. Well, all right. We're at the end of the chapter. The next one will be Revolution, our strategy. Let me see.
The next one's a good one, by the way. The next one is getting into all the four. The last one was a good one, but this 4 phases is really key.
Yeah, this one may be one that gets. Actually, I don't think he goes. Wait, does he go in the phases in that one, or is it the next one? Action or tactics? No, he does. This might be another one that might be two episodes or not. We'll see. I don't know. I'm gonna try to do my best to try to keep each chapter to an episode or so to keep it clean, so we're not starting in the middle of chapters. But either way, yeah, that'll be good. This I hope we drove more people to this from the Dave episode, because maybe more people will be interested in the concepts we're getting at. So this should be good. I'm enjoying this. If you want to go and drop your plugs, we'll get out of here.
Yes, Sal Mayweather at Sally Mayweather, or just Sal the Agorist. 3dprintergoburr.com for 3D printers and supplies. Although honestly, right now I've got major supply chain issues. I'm getting screwed bad by fucking Biden. I should have more inventory another month, I'm hoping. Also, agorathreads.com for anarchist apparel, and the book, of course, is Anti-Politics. You can check it out on Amazon, or you can DM me on Twitter if you want to pay with crypto.
Yeah. This is a good chat. It wasn't a super chat, but I'll bring it up just because it's a good point. I consider agorism more of a revolution of the mind. People just need to realize that they're already living and working in counter economics. And yeah, that's kind of the point we're getting at.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. And then with that, this is the No Way Jose show. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on all the major audio podcatchers, Odyssey as well. My Twitter is at 2020 No Way Jose. If you want to follow me there, get me back to my spot where I was before I got nuked. Like I said earlier, give me money. Patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. I appreciate everyone who joined us, and I appreciate you, Sal, for being here. We'll schedule another one, and we'll get back to you. I don't think we'll do another next week. I'm actually already booked for next week, but probably the following week. We'll talk about this after we end here. But with that, we are out. I appreciate everyone who came.